and we talk about something called the Apocalypse and the book of Revelations in the Bible, where you have the idea that there will be tremendous catastrophes when the second coming is going to take place, that is, the second coming of Christ. When we're talking about the apocalypse, we're talking about how the good and the bad will be separated. That's the Christian understanding of what is called the second coming. Now, when Yeats is talking about the second coming, and as Deepta mentioned to you in the little bit that she said just now, we're talking about a time of tremendous catastrophes. We're talking about super leaders that have suddenly sprung up. People like Hitler, people like Stalin, people like all these totalitarians that exist everywhere. And our question is, who is this new terrible beast who is going to come and be born and rule the whole world?
Yeah.
That is a fear that everybody had, and that is one of the important things that is being said in the next few lines of the poem.
Yeah. If you look at the poem closely, you'll find that it was as if he knew that the world as he knew it was coming to an end. And he takes up the Christian prophecy that Jesus Christ is going to come back to rule the world till the end of time. But this second coming, which Yeats talks about, is quite different from the second coming imagined by Christians. Instead of being a wondrous time with God ruling the earth, you find a monstrous time with, instead of Christ, you have a beast coming to rule the earth. It is something also to think about that he uses the word gyres. Now the gyre in Yeats's private symbology, his private mythology, is a very, very important kind of figure. Later on, we'll show you his own drawing of what a gyre is. But you can imagine it as a kind of a cone. Yeats believed that a gyre, history is like a gyre, and that every 2000 years constitutes a gyre. The gyre is also like the phase of the moon, that it starts from nothing, then we get a full moon, and then again the moon reduces till we get a no moon or amavas. So what happens in human history in periods of the 2000 year period that Yeats thinks about in his private mythology, you find that he is actually thinking about one phase where the most important, most powerful civilizational events take place. The other periods are periods where civilization can decline or where civilization is not so powerful as it could be. So here he is thinking about a moment where civilization is moving from one gyre to the next. But these gyres are not similar, they are opposite. And therefore, his second coming is not like the second coming of Christ, which is beautiful, moral, and welcoming. In fact, it is horrible and difficult. And when we see the next section, we will see why. He says in the second section, surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out when a vast image out of the Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in the sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it real shadows of the indignant desert birds. Over here, you'll find that specifically you have the image of the gyre. You find that there is a movement from one historical period to another. The second coming is at hand, he says. But this is a second coming which is in a desert. A Spiritus Mundi refers to the spirit of the world. An image from the spirit of the world comes up in front of him, and it is the image of the Sphinx. The Sphinx in Europe with head of a lion and body of a man. He sees the Sphinx moving, face hard as a stone, and the birds, the indignant desert birds, symbolizing the old period of time, have to get up and fly away with the coming of this new beast. In the next section, you find, he says, the darkness drops again. Instead of light, you get darkness. But now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. So he says, what kind of beast is going to bring to us this second coming? What kind of terrible monster, what monstrous historical age is being birthed at this moment? Just as he says in Leda and the Swan, the moment of birth actually carries with it monstrosity, the monstrous destruction, disintegration. Here too, he says, a rocking cradle is going to bring about the birth of a monster. And the Sphinx, a monster which has been sleeping for 2000 years, is going to waken and be born again. And what is this monster going to do in the coming 2000 years? This is the question that he leaves us with.
In the biblical reference, you have 666 as the number of the beast in the book of Revelations, and that is supposed to be Nero, the emperor of Rome, which is misunderstood, and people think that is a bad number. But when you translate it, or these Hebrew is and Greek add up to numbers, so what happens over there is they're adding numbers together, and you're giving numbers which become 666. Now, they're looking for a new beast. 2000 years have passed, and there is which of these beasts will become the monster or the terrible beast that is going to come up. Now, another important element of this poem, we had referred to Yeats as starting as a romantic and moving on to a modernist. We can see in this poem that in the first section, we talk about the innocence is lost. Okay? When we talk about Lake Isle of Innisfree, he's looking back to that innocent past where everything is peaceful and calm, where you can go back to childhood. But over here, in the second coming, that going back is not possible. This is a time when you have to face the fact that all innocence is lost, and people know what they're doing. They know how terrible they are and what terrible beast they've created for themselves. And here, the image or the symbol of the beast is much more than what it actually is. And that's why the poem becomes so fascinating. This is what Yeats does with his symbolism, where the beast is supposed to be more, the image is supposed to be outlast the poem or grow much more than the poem. And that's why we find that the beast is always so fascinating, and people try to go back to the poem and try to find out what does the poem mean. Like in the Bible, they go back to the book of Revelations and they try to find out what does this book actually say. Is it talking about today, or is it talking about an earlier period or a future period. The idea of the apocalypse.
Yeah. One other thing that you should pay attention to when you are studying this poem, and that is its rhyme scheme. The rhyme scheme of the poem is written in iambic pentameter. That is, it has 5 stressed, 5 unstressed. It has a beat like this, da dum da dum da dum da dum. That's the way the poem goes, and you find that this iambic pentameter, which Shakespeare also used, is used in a very different kind of way. You have no rhymes in this poem. But you have a lot of repetition. For example, you have turning and turning, falcon and falconer. So you have this kind of repetition, this sense of echoing, which you find in this poem, but no rhyme schemes. This irregular rhythm that you find in this poem contributes to the sense of chaos and disintegration that you find in in the Second Coming. The Second Coming leaves us feeling that there is no escape from the terrible human history that faces us, that confronts us. We do not have a Byzantium where creative things are being fashioned. Instead, we have a time of destruction, not just for 1 year or a few years, but whole centuries of destruction that lie ahead of us.
Yeah, we've given you an image, a cross section of a gyre, so that you understand where would the falconer be and where would the falcon be, and how they're moving away from each other,
so
and they're losing control.
So the center is the falconer, and the circle, the spiral, is the way that the falcon goes.
Yeah, now these are gyres that taken from Yeats's book A Vision, where he develops his private symbology, and he goes to the extent of showing how the gyres are associated with handshakes, how different people have come up and died out in a certain age, and he's tried to find out historically how his theory of gyres actually work.
Yeah, if you look at the image, you'll see that the gyres fit into one another. The primary and the antithetical, they fit into one another, and they are opposite in nature. So after 2000 years of creativity and a rising, shining culture, you will have the next 2000 years collapsing, being a time of destruction, and it is this that he describes in the Second Coming. This is an image from the Sistine Chapel, painted by Michelangelo, which represents the Second Coming of Christ. Here you'll find that it's all golden, bathed in light. Things are happening, things are beautiful, orderly, and holy. But the image of the beast that we showed you a little while back, of a lion-headed beast slouching, waiting to be born, is absolutely antithetical, the very opposite of this image painted by Michelangelo. And finally, we end with this epitaph taken from a poem that Yeats wrote. He says, "Cast a cold eye on life, on death, horsemen pass by." This is what is written on his grave in the County Sligo, the place where he was buried. Finally, at the very end of this lecture, we would like you to take out your pens and pencils and write down from this slide possible books that you could refer to. Perhaps you can look them up in the library, or you can ask your library to order at least 1 or 2 of these books. Please can we have the slide on for a minute so that students can take down the if you have recorded this show, I'm sure you will be able to at least pick up 1 or 2 of these titles. And finally, I hope you have understood and enjoyed these 2 poems that we have discussed, got a sense of Ireland and Yeats's place in Ireland, and the importance of his poetry both to modernism, to an understanding of modernism, as well as to the history of Ireland itself. I hope also that you've been able to make connections between Ireland and India. And in fact, we all should know that Yeats and Rabindranath Tagore were good friends, and Yeats wrote the introduction to Gitanjali. Finally, I'll give Rajan the last few words.
No, I think there are also the famous Purohit Swami papers where Yeats has this kind of collaboration with Purohit Swami, and there's a lot of work being done on that. And by and large, I think what is important is that we must think about how Yeats, you have what you call an organicist poet, who Yeats is. He begins as a romantic and keeps growing and developing. And as in the morning Deepta was telling me, that he writes his best poetry after he gets the Nobel Prize. So does a poet say that I'm a poet and stop writing? Or does a poet keep writing, changing and growing? We must remember that it was T.S. Eliot who saw his symbolist drama at the Hawk's Well, where you have a Japanese artist dancing over there, and that's when you have him being called a modern dramatist also. Thank you.
Thank all of you, and please do get back to us with any questions, even if you write to us or email us at our department. We will be very happy to respond to you. Thank you very much.
Questions?